A 19th century archaeologist found Roman military training records and immediately classified them. For decades, nobody understood why. When they finally leaked, exercise physiologists called the methods impossible and inhumane. Yet Rome produced soldiers who literally did not experience fatigue like normal humans. Rome had a problem. Their enemies were everywhere, and most of them brought more men to the battlefield. The Gauls alone could throw 300,000 warriors at Roman forces. Rome might show up with half that number, sometimes less. So how do you win when you're outnumbered? You don't quit. Here's what Roman generals figured out pretty quickly. The side with energy left at sundown usually wins. Not the bigger army, not the braver one. The one still standing when everyone else is gasping for air. But there's another issue. Roman territory eventually stretched over 2,500 miles across. That's not a typo. Soldiers sometimes marched for months just to reach the battlefield. Then they had to fight. The Greeks had it easy. Their city-states fought battles that lasted an afternoon. Show up, stab some guys, go home for dinner. Roman wars, those dragged on for years, sometimes decades, and losing wasn't really an option. After the Battle of Cannae, 70,000 Romans died in a single afternoon. One bad day nearly ended everything. The entire civilization. Gone. Because soldiers got tired before their enemies did. Makes sense why the Roman military budget ate up 70% of state income, right? That's an insane number. For comparison, modern countries spend maybe 3 to 4% on defense. So every Roman soldier had to perform like 3 men. That's not motivational poster talk. That was the actual math. The question became simple. How do you build soldiers who physically cannot get tired? Well, Rome found the answer. And it started with a training program so brutal that modern special forces would recognize it immediately. 4 months of absolute hell. That's where we're going next. So Rome needed super soldiers. Great. But you can't just wish that into existence. Here's what most ancient armies did. They handed a guy a spear, showed him which end was pointy, and shoved him toward the enemy. Training complete. Good luck. Rome, 4 months minimum before you even smelled a battlefield. 4 months sounds reasonable today. Back then, it was insane. Wars didn't wait. Enemies didn't schedule appointments. But Romans calculated that one properly trained soldier was worth 5 untrained ones. The math worked. Now, what did those 4 months actually look like? Dawn meant running, not jogging, running. Then weapons drill until your arms scream for mercy. And when the sun started dropping, construction work, digging trenches, building walls, because apparently just being exhausted wasn't enough. The guys running this torture program were called campidoctores. Fancy title for men legally allowed to beat you with sticks if you slacked off. No HR department, no complaints process, just a wooden rod meeting your back. And here's where it gets interesting. Roman military physicians actually tracked recruit fitness. They documented that soldiers completing training had resting heart rates 20% lower than when they arrived. They were measuring cardiovascular adaptation 2,000 years before we had a name for it. The 4-month duration wasn't arbitrary either. Romans tested different lengths. Shorter training produced soldiers who broke. Longer training wasted resources. 4 months was the sweet spot for rewiring a wheat farmer's body into something that could march all day and fight all night. What about guys who couldn't hack it? They weren't sent home. That would be too kind. They got assigned to labor units and publicly humiliated. Failure meant shame, not freedom. But completing boot camp was just the beginning. Because next came the marches, 18 miles. That's how far Roman soldiers marched 3 times a week during training. And they didn't stroll. They covered that distance in 5 hours flat. That's a pace most people today can't maintain for 2 miles, let alone 18. But here's what makes it brutal. Each soldier carried 60 to 80 pounds of gear, armor, weapons, digging tools, rations, a cooking pot. Basically, their entire life strapped to their back. Modern special forces train with similar loads. The difference? They wear boots engineered by Nike. Romans wore leather sandals, on stone roads, in summer heat, in winter rain. My feet hurt just thinking about it. Now, why 20 miles specifically? The Romans figured this out through trial and error. Shorter marches didn't trigger enough adaptation. Longer marches caused injuries that pulled soldiers out of training for weeks. 20 miles hit the sweet spot. The body does something fascinating under this kind of stress. It grows additional capillaries in the leg muscles. More capillaries mean more oxygen delivery. More oxygen means muscles that refuse to quit. But regular training marches were just the baseline. When battles required speed, legions executed forced marches of 30-plus miles, and they sustained this pace for days straight. Julius Caesar's troops once covered 100 miles in 3 days to surprise Vercingetorix in Gaul. They arrived ready to fight, not ready to rest, ready to fight. The Gauls expected a week's warning. They got 3 days and a fully operational Roman army at their gates. Legs like that don't happen by accident. They're built through thousands of miles of repetitive punishment, but iron legs need fuel. And what Romans fed their soldiers might surprise you. Here's where Rome got really clever. Every legionary received 3 pounds of grain daily. That's roughly 3,000 calories of slow-burning complex carbohydrates. Not protein shakes, not fancy supplements. Just wheat. And they didn't get it pre-ground either. Soldiers had to grind their own flour every single night. Imagine finishing an 18-mile march, then spending an hour working a hand mill. Your arms are burning, your back aches. But congratulations, you just snuck in another workout without even realizing it. Sneaky, right? Now here's what surprised me when I first learned this. Meat was actually a punishment food in the Roman army. Well, not punishment exactly, but definitely not the main course. Roman commanders noticed something interesting. Soldiers who ate meat-heavy diets got tired faster on long marches. The science backs this up. Meat takes forever to digest. Your body redirects blood to your stomach when it should be fueling your legs. Complex carbs release energy slowly, steadily, like a drip feed that keeps going for hours. Modern marathon runners discovered this same trick about 2,000 years later. They call it carb loading. Romans just called it Tuesday. Then there's Pascha. This stuff sounds absolutely disgusting. Water mixed with vinegar. But it actually worked brilliantly. The acidity killed bacteria that would otherwise give soldiers dysentery. It replaced electrolytes lost through sweating. It was basically ancient Gatorade, except it tasted like salad dressing. One more detail that shows how thorough Rome was. Each 8-man squad shared cooking duties. Nobody ate anything their comrades hadn't also prepared and consumed. If someone tried poisoning the food, they'd kill their own friends too. But feeding soldiers was only half the equation. Training them to fight without exhausting themselves, that required an even smarter trick. Here's where Roman training gets genuinely clever. Training swords weighed twice as much as real ones, not by accident, by design. The wooden practice sword that recruits swung at posts all day long, deliberately heavier than the steel blade they'd carry into battle. Seems backwards, right? But think about it. You spend 4 months swinging a 6-pound wooden sword. Your arms burn, your shoulders scream, you want to quit every single session. Then someone hands you a 3-pound real gladius, and suddenly you feel like you could swing it forever. That's the trick. Modern sports scientists have a fancy name for this. They call it overload training. Here's the funny part, though. They didn't officially discover it until the 1950s. Romans figured it out 2,000 years earlier without a single laboratory or research grant. Sometimes the ancients just stumbled into genius. Recruits practiced against wooden posts called a palace. 1,000 strikes per session, every day. That's not a typo, 1,000. Your arm would fall off just thinking about it. I tried hitting a punching bag 100 times once. My shoulder hurt for 3 days. These guys did 10 times that, daily, for months. And the result? A soldier who trained with heavy equipment could swing a real sword for hours without his arm dropping. Fresh recruits, you could spot them instantly during extended drills. Their sword arms started sagging after 20 minutes. Veterans would actually watch for this. The wobbling arm, the slowing strikes, dead giveaway. But heavy weapons only work if soldiers have the stamina to keep fighting. And building that kind of endurance required something most armies would consider insane. Every single night. Here's where Roman training stops making sense to normal people. After marching 20 miles with 80 pounds of gear, most armies would collapse into sleep. Romans, they grabbed shovels. Every single night, without exception, Roman legions built a fully fortified camp. We're talking a 3-foot trench surrounding the entire perimeter, wooden walls on top, guard towers, organized streets inside, the whole thing. Even if they'd march out at sunrise and never return. This nightly construction burned roughly 800 extra calories per soldier. That's after the march. after carrying enough weight to crush a donkey's spirit, and it took about 3 hours to complete. My back hurts just typing this, but here's what the Romans figured out that nobody else understood. This wasn't punishment, it was the ultimate work capacity builder. See, modern trainers have a term called work capacity. It means how much total physical output your body can handle before shutting down. And there's only one way to increase it. You do more work. The nightly fort building created soldiers who could perform ridiculous amounts of physical labor without their bodies crying for help. They became machines. And the repetition made it automatic. Some soldiers could literally dig trenches while half asleep. Their bodies just knew the movements. But here's the tactical payoff nobody expected. Enemies learned very quickly that attacking a Roman camp was pure suicide. Those walls weren't decorative. So while Germanic warriors stayed awake worrying about night raids, Roman soldiers slept like babies behind their handmade fortress. Better sleep means better recovery. Better recovery means more energy tomorrow. The exhausting nightly ritual actually gave Romans more rest than their opponents. Now imagine those well-rested soldiers fighting in actual battle formation. That's where things get really clever. Here's where Roman warfare gets really clever. Most ancient battles worked like a bar fight. Everyone rushes in, swings until they're exhausted, and whoever's still standing wins. The Celts fought this way, the Germans fought this way, pretty much everyone fought this way. The Romans looked at this approach and thought it was stupid. Their solution? Rotate fighters like a basketball team substituting players. Every 15 to 20 minutes, fresh soldiers would step forward while tired ones fell back to catch their breath. Sounds simple. Executing it in the middle of combat where people are actively trying to kill you? That's the hard part. The maniple system, and later the cohort system, built gaps directly into the battle line. Not mistakes, intentional gaps. Tired soldiers could slip backward through these spaces without breaking the formation. Meanwhile, rested men pushed forward. The timing had to be perfect. Too early, you waste fresh energy. Too late, your front line collapses from exhaustion. Enemy warriors found this absolutely maddening. One Germanic chieftain reportedly complained that fighting Romans was like fighting an army that never got tired. He wasn't wrong. He just didn't understand the trick. Celtic warriors especially couldn't wrap their heads around it. Their culture valued individual combat and personal glory. When a Roman soldier stepped back from a fight, they assumed he was retreating in fear. Then a fresh Roman would appear, and the exhausted Celt would face someone who hadn't swung a sword in 20 minutes. A single Roman soldier might fight 6 separate 15-minute sessions across a 3-hour battle. Still dangerous at the end, still lethal, but this system demanded something specific from each soldier. Not strength, not courage, trust. And building that trust, that required something Rome spent serious time developing. Swimming in armor. Let that sink in for a second. Every Roman legionary had to learn this skill, not as some optional extra, not for fun, because drowning during river crossings killed more soldiers than many actual battles did. And here's the thing nobody mentions. When you swim wearing 60 pounds of metal, your lungs learn to work differently. They expand. They adapt. That same lung capacity, it transferred directly to sword fighting, to hours of shield work, to not gasping for air while some Germanic warrior was trying to remove your head. But swimming was just the appetizer. Wrestling happened daily. And Roman wrestling wasn't like what you see in high school gyms. These matches didn't end when someone got pinned. They continued until one man physically couldn't stand up anymore. Sometimes that took 30 minutes, sometimes longer. The goal wasn't to be stronger, it was to be the last one still moving. Makes sense, right? Because in actual combat, weapons get dropped. Shields break, soldiers fall into mud, and the guy who knew how to fight with his bare hands while completely exhausted, he walked away. Now combine these skills. A soldier who could swim across a river in full armor could also survive being shoved off a bridge during a fight. A wrestler who trained to exhaustion could keep grappling even when his muscles screamed for rest. Modern trainers have a fancy term for this approach. They call it hybrid athletic conditioning. Romans just called it Tuesday. The marching built their legs. The swimming built their lungs. The wrestling built their ability to fight when everything else failed. But none of it mattered if their minds quit first. And that's where Roman training got genuinely scary. Here's something Roman commanders figured out centuries before psychology existed. Your body isn't what quits first. Your brain does. Centurions knew this, so during training, they'd run soldiers until their legs shook. Then, they'd order them to solve complex formation drills, build a defensive position, recite military protocols from memory. Cruel? Maybe, but also genius. See, Roman military doctrine contained a fascinating observation. Panic burns more energy than actual fighting. A calm soldier could last twice as long as a terrified one doing the exact same physical work. The body follows wherever the mind leads. And the weird part is, modern research confirms this completely. Mental fatigue makes your body quit before your muscles actually fail. Your brain essentially lies to you, screaming stop when you've still got 30% left in the tank. Romans understood this instinctively. That's why soldiers memorized responses to dozens of battlefield scenarios. Enemy cavalry approaching from the right, they knew exactly what to do. Line breaking on the left flank, automatic response. No thinking required, because thinking costs energy. Decision-making under stress exhausts you faster than swinging a sword. Then there's the sacramentum, the military oath. Soldiers swore it before gods and comrades, creating psychological commitment that pushed physical limits further than training alone ever could. They'd promised. Breaking that promise meant something. But perhaps the simplest trick? Breathing control. Roman soldiers trained to regulate their breathing during combat. Slow, controlled breaths between sword strikes. This kept heart rates manageable and delayed exhaustion by measurable amounts. I've tried this during workouts. It actually works. Still, even the toughest mind needs the right tools, and Roman equipment was engineered for exactly one purpose. Here's where Rome really showed off their engineering brains. Roman armor wasn't just metal slapped together. The larica segmentata distributed weight across your entire torso. Shoulders, chest, hips, everything shared the burden. Chainmail? That dumps 60 pounds straight onto your shoulders. After 2 hours, you're fighting gravity more than the enemy. But the real genius was the scutum shield. That curved rectangular monster weighed 22 pounds. Sounds brutal for all-day fighting, right? Wrong. The curve lets soldiers rest it against their bodies during breaks in combat. Your arm gets a vacation while you're still protected. I've held replica shields at museums. The straight ones kill your arm in minutes. The curved Roman design, you could hold it way longer. Then there's the gladius. Short, brutal, efficient. Why didn't Romans use long swords like barbarians loved? Because swinging a 3-foot blade exhausts you fast. The gladius measured only 20 inches. Soldiers learned to thrust, not swing. A 6-inch stab to the gut kills just as dead as a dramatic overhead chop, but it uses maybe 1/5 the energy. The helmet design solved the overheating problem too. Slots and gaps allowed airflow while still protecting your skull. Germanic helmets looked cooler. Roman helmets kept you conscious after hour 3. And standardization? Every single piece of equipment was identical across the entire army. Drop your sword, grab your dead buddies. His fits your hand perfectly. No adjustment needed. You're back to killing in seconds. The weird part is how all these small details connected. Weight distribution, energy conservation, interchangeable parts. Each choice served the same goal, but equipment only matters if soldiers can actually keep fighting after taking hits. Which brings us to something Rome invented that nobody else even considered. Here's something that sounds modern but isn't. Rome had hospitals, actual hospitals, with surgeons, recovery rooms, and rehabilitation programs. Every legion traveled with its own medical course called the Medici. These weren't just guys with bandages. They were trained physicians who understood anatomy, infection, and most importantly, how to get wounded soldiers back on their feet fast. Now, most ancient armies, if you got hurt, your buddies dragged you to the side and hoped for the best. Maybe someone's grandmother knew a healing prayer. That was your healthcare plan. Romans built permanent military hospitals called valetudinaria. These facilities had surgical theaters, separate wards for different injuries, and dedicated staff whose only job was rehabilitation. We're talking physical therapy in the ancient world. Wild, right? But here's what made Roman medicine different from just being nice to wounded guys. The entire system focused on one goal: getting soldiers back to fighting strength. Not just alive, fighting. Doctors noticed something fascinating during recovery. Soldiers who stayed somewhat active healed faster than those who just laid around. Complete bed rest actually slowed recovery. Modern sports medicine rediscovered this exact principle about 60 years ago. Romans figured it out through trial and error 2,000 years earlier. For wound treatment, medics carried vinegar, honey, and wine. Sounds like a weird salad dressing. Turns out all three have genuine antibacterial properties. They didn't know why it worked. They just knew wounds treated with these substances rotted less often. The survival statistics tell the real story. A Roman soldier who lived through his initial wounds had an 80% chance of returning to active duty. Medieval armies centuries later, less than 40%. But keeping soldiers healthy was only half the equation. Rome needed them to stay healthy for decades, and that required something unprecedented. Here's the thing that made Roman endurance truly terrifying. It never went away. 25 years. That's how long a Roman soldier served. Not a few campaigns, not until the war ended. A quarter century of marching, fighting, building, and grinding. By year 5, something weird happened inside these men. Their hearts literally grew larger. Bones got denser. Lung capacity expanded beyond normal human ranges. And these changes? Permanent. I remember talking to a cardiologist who studied ancient skeletal remains. He said Roman veteran bones looked like they belonged to a different species. Decades of weighted marches had remodeled them completely. But here's what really baked my noodle. Veterans in their 40s routinely outperformed fresh recruits in their 20s. Sounds backwards, right? Young guys should dominate. They didn't. Endurance training compounds like interest in a savings account. A 40-year-old with 20 years of conditioning had a biological engine that no 20-year-old recruit could match. Not even close. The pension system was genius, too. Soldiers only received their land grants if they completed full service. Die early? Nothing for your family? Get discharged for poor health? Nothing. This motivated soldiers to stay fit like nothing else could. And the knowledge transfer was incredible. Senior soldiers passed down every conditioning trick to new recruits. Institutional memory spanning generations. When veterans finally retired to colonies throughout the empire, Rome didn't lose them. They became ready reserves, men in their 50s who could still march 20 miles and fight at the end. The Romans didn't just build soldiers who couldn't get tired. They built a system that manufactured tirelessness for 700 years. Every empire since has tried to copy it. None have succeeded completely.